The first time I saw that building sitting on my land, I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I remember the sun had barely come up yet. One of those cold East Texas mornings where the fog hangs low over the pasture and everything feels half asleep. I had a cup of black coffee in one hand, reins in the other, just riding the north fence line like I'd done 1,000 times before. And then through the trees, I saw glass reflecting sunlight where no glass had any business being. At first I figured maybe some contractor parked equipment out there overnight, but the closer I got, the more my stomach started turning because this wasn't equipment. This was a whole damn building. 2 stories tall, gray stone exterior, brand new windows, fresh landscaping. Even one of those decorative fountains out front trying way too hard to look classy. And sitting right beside it was my grandfather's old pecan tree, the same tree my dad tied horses to when I was a kid. That's when it hit me. They built the thing right in the middle of my ranch. I actually stopped my horse and just stared for a solid minute because your brain doesn't really know what to do when reality suddenly stops making sense. There was a sign planted near the driveway entrance that read, Hollow Ridge Community Administration Office, and I swear to God I laughed out loud when I read it because it was either laugh or have a stroke right there in the saddle. See, Hollow Ridge was one of those upscale developments that started creeping toward my property about 5 years earlier. Big modern homes, yoga moms, Teslas, imported grass that somehow looked greener than real grass. Folks moved out there wanting country living, but the second they heard coyotes at night or smelled cattle after rain, they started filing complaints like they'd accidentally been dropped into Yellowstone against their will. From the beginning, the Homeowners Association hated me. Not personally at first, more philosophically, I guess. My ranch didn't fit the image they were trying to sell. They wanted clean sight lines, luxury hiking trails, quiet evenings. Meanwhile, I had cattle trailers rattling down dirt roads at 6 in the morning and fences older than half their marriages. They kept trying to buy sections of my land, too. First it was polite letters, then real estate agents, then lawyers pretending not to sound like lawyers. Every offer came with the same fake smile attached to it. We think this could really benefit the community, Mr. Grayson. Yeah, benefit everybody except me. Truth is, my family buried too much life in that soil for me to hand it over so somebody could build a pickleball court and call it progress. My grandfather worked that ranch through droughts so bad he used to boil coffee grounds twice just to stretch supplies. My dad died fixing fences out there during a thunderstorm when I was 26. Every acre had fingerprints on it. So every time Hollow Ridge came knocking, I told them no. Nicely at first, less nicely after the 5th time. Apparently somebody on that board decided no was more of a suggestion than an answer. I rode straight up to the building that morning, tied my horse to their fancy new handrail, and walked inside still wearing muddy boots because I figured if they were going to squat on my property, they could at least deal with some actual ranch dirt on the floor. Place smelled like fresh paint and expensive air conditioning. There were women typing at computers, framed artwork on the walls, one guy carrying a latte like he was starring in a commercial for Suburban Disappointment. Then this young receptionist looked up at me with that tight little customer service smile and said, "Can I help you, sir?" I looked around for a second before answering, mostly because I wanted the moment to settle into the room properly. Then I said, "Yeah, you can start by explaining why you'll build an office in my pasture." You could actually feel the air change after that. People stopped typing. One lady slowly lowered her coffee cup. The receptionist blinked twice like her brain had frozen. Then she gave me the kind of nervous smile people use right before things become somebody else's problem. About 2 minutes later, this man in a navy suit came hurrying down the hallway with his hand already stretched out before he even reached me. "Calvin Mercer," he said, "president of the Hollow Ridge HOA." He smiled like a politician trying to avoid bad press. I think there may be some confusion here. And right there, standing under recessed lighting in a building illegally planted on land my family owned before he was probably born, I realized this wasn't confusion. This was entitlement wearing a necktie. Calvin kept smiling while he talked, but it was the kind of smile people use when they're trying to keep a leaking boat from sinking with duct tape and optimism. "Our development company acquired this parcel during the North Expansion phase," he said, motioning toward a framed map hanging behind the reception desk. "There may have been a filing discrepancy somewhere along the way." Filing discrepancy. That's a cute phrase when somebody messes up your electric bill. It sounds a whole lot different when there's a 2-story office building sitting 60 feet inside your property line. I just nodded slowly and looked around the lobby again. There were leather chairs, polished concrete floors, little bowls of peppermint candy sitting on side tables like they were running a hotel instead of trespassing on private land. One wall had this giant slogan painted across it that read, "Building a better community together." I remember staring at that sentence thinking, man, y'all really skipped over the together part. Calvin kept talking, trying to smooth everything over before it turned into a legal nightmare. I'm sure we can work this out amicably. That word right there, amicably. Rich people love that word when they think they're about to lose money. I finally looked him dead in the eye and said, "You built an office on a cattle ranch without speaking to the ranch owner. That takes confidence. I'll give you that." For the first time, his smile twitched a little. Not gone completely, just cracked around the edges. Then he offered me bottled water like somehow hydration was going to fix felony-level stupidity. I didn't argue after that. Didn't yell. Didn't threaten lawsuits. Truth is, anger usually makes people sloppy, and I had a feeling these folks were already plenty sloppy on their own. So I tipped my hat, walked out, untied my horse, and rode home while that building sat behind me like a bad joke somebody forgot to finish. Soon as I got back to the house, I pulled out every property document my family had. Old surveys, county records, tax files, easement maps, boxes of paperwork my dad kept stacked in the same metal cabinet for 30 years. Around noon, my neighbor Walter came by, because apparently half the county had already heard I'd found a corporate office sprouting out of my pasture overnight. Walter's the kind of man who speaks maybe 50 words a day unless fishing is involved. He walked into my kitchen, looked at the survey maps spread across the table, and said, "Please tell me you're not about to murder anybody." I said, "Not today." He nodded once and grabbed a beer from my fridge like that counted as emotional support. By sunset, I had my answer. The land was mine. Every inch of it. About 8 years earlier, the county adjusted several rural boundary records after a flood shifted parts of the creek bed nearby. My ranch line had been legally corrected and refiled. Hollow Ridge apparently pulled an outdated development map and never bothered verifying it against updated county records before construction started, which meant they poured concrete, ran utilities, landscaped the property, and built an entire administrative headquarters on land they didn't own. The more I thought about it, the crazier it became because somebody had approved permits, somebody had reviewed surveys, somebody signed contracts, and not one person thought maybe they should double-check before dropping millions into somebody else's pasture. I could have called an attorney immediately. Hell, I probably should have. But that night I sat on my porch listening to cicadas while staring out toward the north pasture, and something about the whole thing started getting under my skin deeper than money. See, folks like Calvin always assume country people are slow, or simple, or too tired to fight back. They think if they bury you in paperwork and polished language long enough, eventually you'll just step aside so progress can roll through. What bothered me wasn't the building anymore. It was the arrogance behind it. They truly believed they could erase somebody piece by piece as long as they did it wearing khakis and holding a clipboard. And that's when the idea hit me. Not all at once. More like a spark landing in dry grass. By the next morning, I was down at the county office filing a perfectly legal agricultural containment permit for that section of my ranch. The clerk helping me was an older woman named Denise who'd known my family forever. Halfway through the paperwork, she adjusted her glasses and said, "Calvin Mercer's gonna have a stroke when he sees this, isn't he?" I said, "Probably." She stamped the permit without another word. 3 days later, lumber trucks started rolling onto the property. At first, Hollow Ridge didn't think much of it. They probably assumed I was repairing fencing somewhere nearby. Then my crew started setting posts around their office building. Tight around it. Real tight. By Friday afternoon, there was a 12-foot cedar fence surrounding the entire HOA headquarters with exactly one gate leading in or out. And hanging on that gate was a bright metal sign that read Private Ranch Property, Active Livestock Zone. Saturday morning, I brought in the cattle. 43 head total. Big black Angus cows that weighed more than compact cars and smelled exactly like what they were. By Monday morning, the Hollow Ridge office staff had to walk through a muddy cattle lane just to get from the parking lot to the front door. I parked myself on horseback near the fence line before sunrise just to watch the first day unfold because honestly, after the week I'd had, I deserved a little entertainment. The first employee arrived wearing cream-colored slacks and heels that sank straight into wet mud after the second step. She froze when one of the cows wandered near her and let out this tiny, horrified gasp, like she'd encountered a grizzly bear instead of Bessie from Henderson Livestock Auctions. Another guy in a polo shirt tried hopping over manure piles while carrying a laptop bag and coffee at the same time. Lost both battles. Around 8:30, Calvin's black Mercedes pulled up outside the gate. He climbed out, stopped dead when he saw the fence, then slowly looked over toward me sitting on horseback about 50 yards away. Even from that distance, I could see pure disbelief on his face. He marched through the mud, trying to keep his dress shoes clean, which was funny because that fight was over before it started. "You can't do this," he snapped the second he reached the gate. I took a sip of coffee before answering. "Actually, according to county records, I can. You're deliberately interfering with business operations." "No," I said. "I'm ranching on my ranch." God. The look he gave me after that almost made the whole situation worth it by itself. Like his brain physically couldn't process somebody refusing to play by his rules. Then one of the cows rubbed against the side of his car hard enough to rock it slightly, and I had to look away before I laughed directly in the man's face. Over the next few days, the complaints started pouring in. Staff members didn't want to walk through livestock. Homeowners were furious about the smell drifting toward the jogging trails nearby. Somebody posted drone footage online showing HOA employees crossing through cattle gates carrying briefcases while cows wandered around behind them. By the end of the week, the video had spread all over town. People started stopping me at the feed store just to shake my hand. One old rancher laughed so hard telling the story, he nearly choked on chewing tobacco. But underneath all the humor, something uglier started surfacing. Residents inside Hollow Ridge found out the board had approved construction without fully verifying land ownership. Then rumors started spreading that Calvin ignored concerns from one of the surveyors because correcting the mistake would have delayed construction and cost the development company a fortune. Suddenly, this wasn't just an embarrassing mistake anymore. It was negligence. And negligence gets real expensive real fast. Then one afternoon, I got a visit from somebody I didn't expect. A woman named Claire Bennett showed up at my ranch gate driving a silver SUV covered in HOA parking stickers. Mid-40s maybe, tired eyes, looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She introduced herself as Hollow Ridge's former treasurer. Former being the important word there. She handed me a thick envelope and said quietly, "You deserve to know they knew this might happen." Inside were copied emails, internal meeting notes, permit discussions, and buried in those documents was a message from a contracted surveyor warning the HOA board about inconsistencies in the north parcel boundaries nearly 6 months before construction began. Calvin's response was only one sentence long. "Proceed as planned." I remember just sitting there staring at that email while the evening wind rattled the porch screen behind me. Because right then the whole thing stopped feeling like incompetence and started feeling personal. I must have read that email from Calvin 20 times that night. Proceed as planned. For words, that was it. For words that explained every smug smile, every fake apology, every carefully polished sentence that man had thrown at me since the moment I walked into that office. It was never a misunderstanding. They knew there was a risk the land wasn't theirs. They just figured nobody out in the country would have the money or patience to fight them once the building was already standing. And honestly, maybe that strategy had worked before. Maybe somewhere along the line people like Calvin got used to pushing over folks who didn't wear suits or speak in legal language. But my family didn't survive 3 generations on stubborn land by folding every time somebody wealthier came knocking. The next morning I drove into town and met with an attorney named Frank Delaney, a gray-haired old bulldog of a man who still kept paper files stacked floor to ceiling in his office like it was 1987. I handed him the envelope Claire gave me. He read the email once, leaned back in his chair, and let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "that changes things considerably. Turns out knowingly building on disputed land opened Hollow Ridge up to far more than property damages. Fraud, negligence, liability exposure. Suddenly the problem sitting in my pasture wasn't just embarrassing, it was radioactive." Frank asked what I wanted to do. And weirdly enough, I already knew the answer before he finished the question. "I want my land back," I said. "That's it." He studied me for a second like he expected revenge speeches or dollar signs. But truthfully, the older I get, the less interested I am in destroying people. I just wanted them to finally understand that there are some lines you don't cross, because crossing them costs more than money. 2 days later, Calvin showed up at my ranch house again. Only this time, there was no luxury car shine left in him. His tie was loose, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He stood on my porch while cattle groaned somewhere out in the pasture behind us. Funny thing was, the smell didn't even bother me anymore. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. No speeches, no corporate buzzwords, just exhaustion. I leaned against the porch rail and looked out toward the fenced-off office building sitting in the distance, surrounded by cows like the world's most expensive barn decoration. "Simple," I said. "Tear it down. Restore the land. Cover every dollar of damage and legal cost. Then we walk away." He stared at me for a long moment. "And if we don't?" I shrugged. "Then your employees better get real comfortable with livestock." For a second I thought he might argue again, but something inside him finally cracked. Maybe it was the lawsuits coming. Maybe it was the homeowners turning on the board. Maybe it was realizing one bad decision had detonated his entire career. Whatever it was, the fight left his eyes right there on my porch. 3 days later, demolition crews rolled onto the ranch. I stood by the north fence line, watching excavators tear into that building piece by piece while dust drifted across the pasture in the morning light. And I'll be honest with you, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. There's a strange sadness that comes when people force conflict where there never needed to be any. Hollow Ridge could have been good neighbors. We probably still would have argued sometimes. That's life. But none of this had to happen. Pride did this. Entitlement did this. The belief that money automatically outranks roots. It took about a week to remove everything. Concrete ripped out, utilities capped, landscaping stripped away. Afterward, they brought fresh soil in and replanted native grass across the scar where the building used to sit. First good rain we got after that. The pasture started healing over like the land itself was relieved the nonsense had finally ended. Claire testified against the HOA board during the legal fallout. Calvin resigned before the civil suits even finished stacking up. Last I heard, Hollow Ridge homeowners voted to dissolve the entire HOA leadership committee and replace it with residents from inside the community. Funny enough, a few months later, some of those same residents actually came over to introduce themselves properly. One family even brought homemade peach cobbler as a peace offering. Turned out most of them weren't bad people at all. They'd just trusted the wrong folks to represent them. That happens more than people admit. But I did leave one thing standing out there near the north pasture entrance. That metal sign hanging on the old cedar gate. Private ranch property, active livestock zone. Walter asked me one day why I never took it down. I told him because memory fades faster than fences do. Besides, every now and then I still catch tourists slowing their cars to stare at that empty stretch of grass like they're trying to imagine the story that happened there. And maybe that's the real reason I left the sign up. Not as a warning, but as a reminder. You can build a whole lot of things in this world. Neighborhoods, offices, fortunes, reputations. But if you build them on top of somebody else's life without permission, eventually the ground gives way underneath you. And honestly, I still wonder sometimes whether I handled it the right way. Maybe I should have sued immediately. Maybe the cattle thing was petty. Maybe turning their luxury office into a glorified barnyard crossed a line. But then again, they crossed mine first. So I'll leave that question to you. If somebody tried taking a piece of your family's history and acted like they owned it just because they had money and paperwork, what would you have done? Let me know down in the comments. Because around here, people still argue about this story every time it comes up.